And I have the Director, CEO of the Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprises, Dr. Muda Yusuf, is live in the studio. Good afternoon. It's good to start the week with you.
Thank you, Tolu.
Yes.
Good afternoon.
Yes, I want to start with this move, the critical move, or the time we find ourselves. There's high inflation. We have issues with currency. We have soaring energy prices. We can go on and on with this. And this is when Mr. or Dr. Cardoso is coming in. Restoring confidence in the forex market seems to be very big to me. Where do you think we'll start this from with what we face today?
Yes, it's a very challenging situation, no doubt. But it's not something that the CBN alone can do. You know, the CBN or the monetary authority needs to work in collaboration with the fiscal authorities. But there are policy aspects or the policy components of the policy response that can come from the Central Bank of Nigeria. And that is why we said that, because the main issue right now is the crisis of confidence. And when there is a collapse of confidence, there is a tendency for people to become, you know, a bit restless, and also the tendency to rush, to front-load demand for forex, and all of that. Because the current pressure we are seeing in the foreign exchange market today are not just about those who are doing business or those who have imports, you know, that raw materials, machineries, or those who have, you know, business obligations to settle. There are also a huge component of speculation, you know, speculation because people are losing confidence in the currency. And there's also the component of money laundering and corruption. Because when people are laundering money, they don't care how much the exchange rate is.
True.
They will buy it at any rate. You know, so that component is there. But what is more important is to ensure stability. And the way to ensure stability, one, is to ensure that we avoid market suppression. That is why we are saying in that release that in addition to the I&E window, because there's an element of political economy that is creeping into the system, and understandably so, because of the kind of pushback to these reforms. So we cannot say that the I&E window should be completely floated. But we can have an autonomous window within the banking system or within the BDC, whatever it is, where there be no encumbrances to demand and supply, where there be no encumbrances to pricing. I'm saying this because it will insist that all inflows should come at the I&E window rate. These remittances will not come. They be diverted either to neighboring countries, they be diverted to other countries, you know, and there's going to be a lot of under-the-table transactions. So in order to encourage transparency of transactions in the autonomous window, let us have a window where the currency can trade freely, while we also preserve, with a lot of vigilance, the I&E window. So that is what I mean by avoiding market suppression. Okay. And of course, there is also, you know, the need for the fiscal authorities, of course, to work closely with the monetary authorities to see how we can also deal with issues of supply. Because the basic problem that caused all of this is the acute shortage of supply, which has now been fueled by speculative activities and the release of the financial reports. You know, about 6 years financial reports of the CBN, they also did not quite help matters, because a lot of stakeholders now started analyzing the report and seeing that the results are is not as good as we thought it was. So that also further fueled the speculation. But if we're able to move along these lines, I'm sure that with time, we'll be able to stabilize the system and restore some confidence. And if we're able to get the confidence back, then we are likely to see a lot more inflows. Of course, there are structural things like the crude oil theft, the clearing of the backlog, which is also very critical.
Very critical.
Because the backlog, when the president is out there, you know, asking investors to come and all of that. But investors will do their due diligence. They want to know what is happening to foreign investors that are on ground.
Already on ground.
So if they get stories that those who are on ground are not able to remit their funds, that will be a big negative to all the efforts that the president is putting in place. So a whole lot of issues need to happen together for us to be able to restore this confidence, because confidence is very key, particularly in the financial system. No matter how strong an institution is, when there's a collapse of confidence, that institution may just come down completely.
I'm also interested in deepening the financial system. Now, in that write-up, the banking system is still largely dislocated or from the investing community. I want to understand that, especially businesses and all of that. How can we help Nigerians understand this dislocation that occurs at the moment between the banking system and the investing community?
Yeah, one of the things we also expect the new CBN to do is to ensure that we have a much better synergy or connection between the banking system and the investing community. And one of the metrics through which you measure this is to look at credit to private sector as a percentage of GDP.
Okay.
Credit to private sector as a percentage of GDP in Nigeria today, it used to be around 15%, but it has moved slightly up to about 20%, 20.6%. But that is still very, very low when you compare to what it should be. The sub-Saharan average, for instance, is about 28%. The global average, for instance, is about 145%. So you can see how far we are. So that speaks to the fact that the banking system is not adequately supporting the investing, the business community. So we need to look at what are the bottlenecks so that we can get the banking system to support a lot more the business community. That is why if you look at the structure of their income, non-interest income is accounting for about 42% of their total income. Whereas the basic function of a bank is financial intermediation, which is essentially lending, which is essentially mobilizing resources from the surplus end of the economy to the deficit end of the economy. That is what banking is all about. So when we now see a situation where the bulk of their businesses is now skewed in favor of non-core banking activities, then we have to worry. Because you need the banking system to be able to support the economy. The small businesses account for almost 50% of GDP. They account for less than 1% of credit. That is why a lot of loan sharks are taking advantage of people, charging them very prohibitive interest rates, because the banking system is not there to actually provide that kind of support. So we need to re-examine the entire model and see how we can get the banking system to support the economy a lot more. And another very important variable or factor that we can look at is the tenor of funds in the financial system. If you look at our banking system today, over 85% of the funds in the banking system are of less than 1 year tenor. So when you have that kind of structure of funding in the system, how do you fund long-term projects? How do you fund projects that are even 5 years or 10 years? So that's a very huge limitation to what the banking system can do in terms of supporting our economic growth and investment. So we need to also look at what factors are responsible for that so that we can have less mismatch. Because right now, as at, I think last year, there was a very huge, almost 42 trillion naira in terms of negative mismatch between the assets and liabilities in the banking system. In other words, the tenor of the liabilities are not matching the tenor of the assets. So the tune of cumulatively of almost 42 trillion. So that itself is also not good for the financial system stability. So these are some critical issues that we need to deal with in order to deepen the financial system and in order to ensure that the financial system supports the economy.
Something, the Ways and Means issue financing fiscal deficits was everywhere. We kept talking about it last year and even up till now, and the impact that is having on our debt. But how would you help us interpret that, and what do you think the CBN did right? What did they not do right with regards to that?
Well, there is a statutory provision that prescribes the limits of Ways and Means, which is that it has to be, I think, 5% of the actual revenue of government of the previous year.
Okay.
But under the last dispensation of the central bank, we went completely overboard to unspeakable levels. So what we will plead with the new team is that as much as possible, they should adhere strictly to the statutory provisions of the CBN Act. And I imagine that I think there has been some amendment to expand it a little, because these things have serious implications for the macroeconomic stability. When we talk about issues of high debt, if we talk about inflation, talk about exchange rate depreciation, this is a major factor. Because by the end of that CBN administration, we had a cumulative Ways and Means of almost 23 trillion.
Yeah.
And as of July, the Ways and Means had even gone up to about 38 trillion. These things have significant effects on money supply, on inflation, and on the strength of the currency. So it has very fundamental implications for the economy. So that is why, as much as possible, we should adhere strictly to the Ways and Means provisions in the CBN Act. And as we speak now, because of this CBN and because of this Ways and Means, our debt has ballooned by almost 75%.
Yes.
We're now talking about 87 trillion.
Scary.
Yes. How do you service that? So it's a lot of burden. So we cannot afford to do the same or to go through the same route. So that don't create more complications for the economy and for businesses.
Staying with the banking sector now, you also said something about capital requirements for banks. I'm interested in that really, because looking at the last capitalization from 2 billion to 25 billion. And if you want to look at it in foreign exchange angle, it's about 187 million as at that time. But as at now, we're talking about 32 point.
Yeah.
That's like total, I don't know if I call it devaluation or what has happened to our currency. So what do you now think is responsible for this, and what can be done?
You see, why that is important is that you need a very strong capital base to support the stability of the banking system. So that the exposures that the banks have will be something that they have the capital base to support. Now, there has been a massive erosion of the capital base. Just as you said, from 25 billion in 2004, now we are talking about, it's still 25 billion, but it's not just about $32 million. As against $187 million.
That's a lot.
So something has to be done in terms of the capitalization of the banks, so that you can match the capital base with the kind of liabilities or with the kind of exposures that they are carrying. Because if there is a serious mismatch, it's also not good for depositors, it's not good for the economy. So I think part of the things that the new CBN team should also prioritize is this capital recapitalization issue. Although I'm aware that some of the banks have, enough capital. They have grown their capital base significantly. But there are some that are still on the fringes. And we cannot afford a system, we cannot afford anything that will pose a systemic risk to the banking system. Again, just as we said, banking is about confidence. That is what is holding the financial system. Once there is a collapse of confidence, the whole system will crash. So we need to preserve the confidence in the banking system And that is why this capitalization is very important. So it's something that we need to do very urgently, because 2004 exchange rate was about 133 naira to the dollar. Today we are talking about 770 or 777 or whatever.
900 in dollar market.
So we need to, there's a need for that adjustment so that I can bring the capital base of banks in line with current economic realities. Very important.
Now, it's really important. Naira redesign is also something that many will say is a right of the central bank to review the currency and, renew them, avoid counterfeiting, and all of those reasons they alluded to at that time. But we didn't have it funny when it happened last year. So what would you say around this? And let's wrap up with risks generally in the banking industry. How strong are we?
Given our current situation, this is not the time to even be talking about Naira redesign. So our suggestion is that we should leave that to rest indefinitely. And we even say that because already, even in terms of our cashless policy performance or cashless status in terms of ranking, we are not doing badly at all. Cash as a percentage of our GDP is less than 2%. So that means even as a country, we are doing far better than many of the developing countries, even some advanced economies. Many of them have 5% ratio, some of them have up to 10% ratio. We are talking about less than 2% in Nigeria. So a lot of progress has been made. And you don't fix what is not broken. So let us leave the Naira redesign, for now, and let's face more important issues. And talking about risk to the banking system, well, the risk is also a function of the context in which the economy is operating. Because the banking system is supposed to relate to the players in the economy. So right now, one of the biggest risks we are faced with are these macroeconomic risks. You can see the implication of what is happening now for the profit of some banks as a result of revaluation of their liabilities. Many of them have been thrown massively into negative. I'm talking of their financial statements and so on, and all of that. Then the risk that also poses to business performance. So the macroeconomic risk is perhaps the biggest risk that we are faced with now. Because whatever affects the economy will affect the banking system. So it is very important that we get the macroeconomic situation right, so that we also don't have the risk of non-performing loans. Because when things begin to go out of hand the way it seems to be going, the capacity of many economic players to service their debt with the banks will be highly, highly constrained. And that will mean that we may begin to post more non-performing loans. And we can also find a situation where the banks will be very reluctant to give credit because of the challenges in the environment. So the biggest risk, as far as I'm concerned, is the risk around the macroeconomic environment and the implication it has for non-performing loans and the quality of loan assets in the banking system.
Interesting conversation, I must say. Dr. Muda Yusuf, Director, Chief Executive Officer of Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise, starting the week with us. We appreciate this. Thank you so much. And we'll keep a tab and see what plays out as the CBN continues to. It's a transition period. Let's see how it all plays out.
Exactly.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.